Cool. Thank you so much, Anna Lily. Kia ora whānau. My name is Kamya. I appreciate you coming here late on a school night on a Thursday and joining me to listen to my talk about the knowns and unknowns about sleeping in the city. This sounds like it's about people. It's not. It's about birds. This is a presentation that kind of covers the first chapter of my PhD. It was my first year of my PhD was a time when you're kind of waiting around. There's lots of permissions to be granted. Your computer hasn't arrived. There's lots of waiting around. So during this time, I kind of wanted to explore what we actually knew about how sleep disturbance or sleep deprivation impacts birds, because that's what my PhD is about. And I'm doing it with my lovely supervisors that you might have heard about or met. Crystal Kane, Margaret Stanley, and Giuliani Gaviraghi Musoi. And really quickly, I do want to acknowledge that my PhD was made possible by the University of Auckland Doctoral Scholarship, the Royal Society Marsden Fund, and also the Max Planck Institute. So I'll start you right at the very beginning, kind of taking you on a journey of my brain and how I kind of decided what I wanted to look into and how I was able to answer the knowns and unknowns, and taking those unknowns and known unknowns and deciding what we need to look into going forward. So starting at the very beginning, I used to live in a house. I grew up in a house that was very suburban. It was at the end of a very long driveway. It was dark, it was quiet. There really weren't many people around. And I remember getting awesome sleep. I used to sleep great every night, right throughout the night. But then right before starting my PhD, I wanted to move closer to the city so I could be closer to this university campus. And now my house is on a main busy road. My bedroom window is right under a street light. And there's lots of noise from people walking by at all hours throughout the night, talking at unreasonable volumes, and cars hooning down our road. So this kind of showed me that moving from a dark, quiet, in a place that didn't have many people, moving from there to a very city, people-heavy environment really did affect my sleep. And I noticed that when I wasn't able to get a lot of sleep, it affected things like my mood. I was just generally unlikable when I wasn't getting enough sleep. And it was affecting things like my learning, my memory. And you might have experienced this as well. If you've ever tried to fall asleep in a room full of lights with or a room full of people talking, it's quite difficult, and you probably end up waking up quite a bit, waking up earlier than you're used to. And although we can feel this as people, we even have numbers from different studies on people that have shown that it does affect our memory. It does affect our learning, especially in children that are trying to learn things like how to speak or learn different languages. Children that aren't getting enough sleep actually learn worse when they are sleep deprived. And on top of that, it affects things like our communication and our daily behaviors. So from a human point of view, we've got lots of research that has looked at people through surveys, through large-scale surveys across lots of different cities and urban environments. And overall, things like traffic noise from planes, trains, cars have led to lower sleep quality. It's led to more awakenings throughout the night, and it also increases difficulty in falling asleep. And then similarly with artificial light at night from things like street lights, it actually, people have reported decreased sleep duration, delayed sleep onset, so they just generally sleep later in the night compared to people that have lower artificial light at night in their environment. And then they also report increased daytime sleepiness. So if we're sharing our cities with all these animals, especially birds here in Aotearoa, it's probably likely that they're also feeling the impacts of things like light and noise and people and predators. So to answer if we are even affecting bird sleep, we wanted to find out, do all animals sleep? Do birds sleep? And the answer is yes. Every single animal that we've studied so far has been found to exhibit some form of sleep. Now, it might not be the full 8 hours that we experience. It might not be the different cycles that we have. So for humans, we have different phases of sleep, like REM and non-REM. You might have heard of these. But simple animals like jellyfish, they have very simple neurological mechanisms. So they don't have a whole brain. They just have little neurons that fire throughout their body. But even these exhibit increases in activity and decreases in activity as the day goes on. And animals maintain their ability to sleep despite the consequences. While they're asleep, animals are essentially paralyzed. They're not very aware of their surroundings. And if a predator does approach them, whether that's a person or a different animal, it takes longer for them to notice and also get away from that predator. Sleep is also a really large time investment. For humans, we spend 8 hours of our day, or of our night sleeping, sometimes more. And for animals, this varies, but it is still a really big investment in time when they could be using the same time doing fun things like mating or finding resources. Some animals have even gone as far as adapting to be able to maintain their sleep. So animals that migrate long distances, those that have to migrate for days in a row, such as frigate birds, they've adapted to sleeping by sleeping with half their brain at a time. So while half their brain is sleeping, the other half will take care of maintaining their flight path. And then the halves swap, so their brain can be fully rested. So if we are sharing our cities with animals, and there's evidence of that, and you might have noticed looking outside your window that there's lots of birds in your garden, there's lots of birds in the city. If we're sharing our city and all these disturbances are affecting us as people, then it's probably likely that the birds that we share our cities with are also being affected. And we want to find out not only how are they being affected, but how much they're being affected, and also what the resulting consequences are. So to do this, I use the Web of Science research database. This is just a huge collection of studies. It doesn't include every single research paper out there, but it includes a pretty good chunk of them. I just wanted to find out where the missing pieces are and what we can do for future research to make sure we know all the missing links. So I had the search terms sleep loss bird, sleep deprivation bird, sleep disruption bird, and sleep disturbance bird. And I did this just to make sure that I was covering as many bases as possible. Now, after cleaning all these results, because sometimes I had papers that were in different languages that I wasn't able to read. I had results that may have been book chapters or reviews that weren't original research articles, or they were on the country turkey instead of the bird turkey. Cleaning out all of those results, I was left with 207 research papers. I took those 207 and I read through them all. It was a painstaking process, but in the end, I was able to find out this. This is a simplified figure of how sleep disturbance is affecting birds and how much we know about each step of the process. So the blue arrows represent how much knowledge we have, and the thicker the blue arrow, the more we know about it. The grey dashed arrows represent that we virtually know nothing about this connection. So we know we know somewhat about how stimuli, and this is things like light or noise or predators, and how stimuli affect sleep. So whether they're waking up in light or whether they are waking up because of noise. We know a little bit about how stimuli affect internal function, and internal function is things that you can't see in a bird. So for example, how it affects their genetic makeup, how it affects their brain function. And we also know very little about how stimuli affect functional consequences. These are things that you are able to see. So their breeding, their behavior, their mass, their morphology, and things like parasite load. These are things you can visualize. But the results of my search made me realize that we know virtually nothing about sleep and how it affects the... Can I point? Yeah. You can't see that. We know virtually nothing about how sleep affects internal function, and how sleep affects functional consequences. So that is kind of our mission going forward. That is what we want to look into to make sure we have a complete picture of how we are disturbing bird sleep and how that is in turn affecting them. I'll give you a couple of examples of the studies that I found and some of the trends that I was able to identify. So by far, the most research was done under birds being affected by light. So a whole lot of studies were done looking at how different colors of light, different intensities of light, also whether they were in the wild or artificially or experimentally exposing them to light in the lab, that sort of stuff. Most of the studies were just looking at light and how it affected sleep. Some of the examples that I have are zebra finches and black swans that slept under artificial light at night decreased their sleep duration. We also found that great tits decreased sleep duration and also had delayed awakening. And if you remember from the people studies, this was also the same in humans sleeping under artificial light at night. So there's some correlation between humans and birds sleeping under disturbances. Great tits and blue tits were the most studied species, and this was expected. They're Northern Hemisphere birds, European birds that are very commonly studied in biology. We also found that female tree swallows decreased chick provisioning. Now this is one of those functional consequences that I was talking about. You can visually see that they're having flow-on effects, not only to themselves, but to their offspring as well. And Eurasian tree sparrows decreased their melatonin production. Melatonin is a hormone that we also have. You may have heard of it. It kind of controls our daily circadian rhythm. So things like other hormones in our body that cycle on a daily cycle, increase and decrease on a daily cycle is also controlled by melatonin. The way we sleep, when we sleep and how much we sleep is also controlled by melatonin. So there's lots of flow-on effects of your melatonin being affected. Other stimuli were less studied. So things like noise and predation, they had very much fewer studies than the impacts of light. The studies that did look at noise had mixed effects. So some of them found that birds were able to actually function the same. They were able to sleep the same regardless of how much noise was around them. And then some studies found that it did affect how much sleep they were getting. So they were getting less sleep when they were sleeping in lots of noise. Majority of the predation studies looked at napping during the day and how that was being affected. And the predators they used were very interesting. They looked at dogs, people, and robotic cars. So I won't cover that here just because it doesn't seem super relevant to what we're trying to look at. But just an FYI, if you're trying to create a fake predator, maybe a robot car might work. Then some of the functional consequences of sleep that I found were that common minor decreased singing. And not only did they decrease the number of songs during the day, but the songs they were able to sing were a lot simpler than the songs that they were singing before they were sleep disturbed. Both chickens and zebra finches increased in mass. Now this may seem like a good thing, and you might be wondering, why are they increasing mass if they're not getting enough sleep? Interestingly, this is the same pattern that is shown in humans. So it's probably because they have a greater time that they're active when they're not sleeping. There's more time for them to eat. And this is the same thing we talked about at the start. We were saying if they're not sleeping, they're able to allocate more time to doing other fun things. And in this case, they were just eating more. Both chickens and zebra finches had increased mortality when they were faced with long-term sleep disturbances. One of my favorite studies, well, not favorite, one of the most interesting studies that I found during this is there was a lab that had a zebrafinch colony, and they were maintaining the zebrafinch colony for a long time. And because they were maintaining it in a lab, they had to continuously monitor things like their mass and how often their zebra finches were dying as well. They needed to keep track of their mortality rate. They realized that for some reason they had a really big spike in their mortality rate in the zebra finch colony, and nothing else had changed. But luckily, they also had a light sensor that they had placed in the lab just to make sure everything was functioning. They realized when they looked at the light sensor that one of their automatic light switches had been broken, and so the lights were just on all the time. And that period where the lights were on all the time was exactly the same time where they had a massive increase in their mortality. So that's not great news for the birds that are sleeping under our street lights, but at least we have knowledge of this, and these poor zebra finches did not die in vain. So the knowledge gaps that we really need to fill going forward is we really don't know what happens when birds don't get enough sleep. So in general, we just need to explore the consequences. And the way we do this is we just have to measure things randomly, what we're interested in, until we have a big enough data set that we can start focusing on specific things. So for now, going forward, we just need the future scientists to kind of just pick a effect that they think is probably likely going to be happening. So for example, if they think mass is being affected, or if they think communication or singing is going to be affected, it's just a matter of measuring things following sleep being disturbed. We also need to look at long-term sleep disturbances. Pretty much every single study that I found was looking at either 1 night, maybe 2 nights or 3 nights. But the reality is the birds that are sleeping in urban environments are likely sleeping there for their entire lives. It's a chronic long-term exposure to these disturbances. We also found a lot of studies looking at we also need more studies to look at non-migrating species, or species that don't face drastic daylight changes. A lot of what I found was studies looking at the sleep of species that migrate, because of course it's a very interesting idea to explore how birds are affected when they're sleeping differently during migration. There were also lots of studies looking at species that that were living in areas closer to the poles, where daylight can range from 0 hours a day to 24 hours a day. Again, a really interesting concept. But both of these things have been around for a very long time, so species have been able to adapt to living under those conditions. There were no studies that looked at juveniles. We know from human studies that children are very vulnerable to not getting enough sleep, so it's likely that birds that have very similar brains to us are also being affected if it's when they're juveniles. And we know that it's not just adults living in our cities. We know that juveniles in nests are being hatched in urban environments as well. Now, I'm sure I don't need to explain to you why we need to care, or why we should care, but just in case you need a little more convincing, if sleep is affecting their daytime behavior, or the amount of time that they're active, it might be reducing their movement, so they might not be spreading as far when they leave the nest. They may also not be going as far to meet mates and have babies. It might be affecting their communication. We know it affects communication for humans. It may be resulting in less singing or bad singing. Again, this may be affecting how birds are attracting mates, or how they're defending territories. And we know from a couple studies that there may be effects on hormones such as melatonin. If other hormones such as testosterone, a really important hormone for breeding, is affected, then there may be resulting effects to breeding as well. And these are just some ideas that I have. Again, this is very new exploratory research, so there might be way more reasons that we need to care and why we should care. But yeah, starting off, this is just a couple of ideas of what people can explore in the future. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your attention. This is the first time I'm presenting anything from my PhD. So yeah, I really appreciate it. And all of this is published in my first ever paper. So if you want to read it, it's open access. Feel free to scan the barcode or just search up the title. Thank you.
Thank you.